Good evening, everybody. This is Cynthia Elliott, President of the Rochester Board of Education. Tonight, we're having a work session. I'm going to facilitate the budget book presentation until Vice President LeBron comes on. And so in the, to save time, I just wanted us to get started. And so Chief Financial Officer Carlene Pierce, I'm going to give it to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, President Elliott, Commissioners, Dr. Jallo, and the RCSD community. In order to get us all on the same page, we need to remember that there are two primary reasons for the redesign of the budget book. The first is the approved state monitor's financial plan included the recommendation for the district budget book to be redesigned and improved upon. Secondly, our community members have requested and outside consultants have recommended that our budget book be redesigned to be more user-friendly and transparent. We realize that change is not easy. However, we hope you agree the new budget book we're presenting to you meets the spirit of the tasks we were assigned to take on and the goals we were to deliver. Lastly, I hope that the redesign of the budget book will be symbolic in its effort to leave the past behind and to look forward to a future where equity in education can be attained under your leadership as commissioners. I hope it reminds us that we can start new again as a unified team to meet the shared goal of providing our children with the highest quality of education possible. With that said, I'll turn the presentation over to Executive Director of Budget, Terry Hessler.
Good evening. Thanks for letting me present tonight. I'm excited about tonight. Good evening, Commissioners. President Elliott, and Vice President LeBron, if you're here. I can't see all the windows. Tonight, I'm going to do kind of like a follow-up from the first presentation that was given on the budget book, redo, if you will, or rehaul, whatever we want to redesign, whatever we want to call it. And we were tasked with coming up with almost like a mock budget book, and that's what we want to show tonight, which has been given out ahead of time, and maybe have a little discussion about. First, I think I have permission to share, so I'm gonna have a couple screens going here, so just be patient with me for a second. Can you guys see a budget book? Yeah, okay, I see Carlene shaking her head. Great. Okay, so to start off with, the couple points that I want to reiterate from the presentation and tonight that we kept in mind when we were doing this. And the first and foremost was, what is the purpose of a budget book specifically? And I think the best answer we came up with is to present the subsequent year's financial forecast to all stakeholders, which is what we kept in mind when we were trying to design this book. The second point that I want to reiterate is tying this book back, just like CFO Pierce just mentioned, tying this book back to our strategic plan, the state monitor's academic and fiscal plans, which includes the redesign of this. This is one of the items in it, but we also want the book to be able to demonstrate tying back to those plans of other recommendations, the consent decree, and any corrective action plans that we have. Let me scroll down a little bit here. So the first dozen pages or so are going to be pretty much almost exactly the same way as they were. We have the lead-in pages. We have all the board, the superintendent, and the budget team, and then a letter from Superintendent Myers-Small. So that's all the same. None of that's going to change. Our resolution that has to go to the city, that's all going to be the same. And then coming down to a section that we want to refer to as the budget at a glance. And this is going to be more of like a combined, a combining of like how to read what used to be, how to read the budget book, and anything that the reader needs to know coming into the redesigned budget book.
I'm so sorry, Terry. I'm so sorry. Would you mind making the screen of your screen just a little bit larger in terms of print?
I don't, I'm in Adobe. Let's see. Can
Those
I,
are real words, okay? Those are like quasi-Latin words. They're just used in a, like
Yeah.
No, of course. Yeah, just originally when we were doing the walkthrough of the table of contents.
okay.
The plus sign right there at the top, right there where you see the plus and minus, right there.
Oh,
There you go.
oh, like, I'm sorry, within
There,
Adobe.
within the duck. Yep, there you go.
big enough? I think it's gonna go off the screen. I can,
That's good.
it cuts off a little bit on each end, but it's just an outline, so we don't have to read every word. So what I was saying is, oh yes, a few things that I want to mention about the book of not necessarily things that were taken out of the book or put back into the book or eliminations or anything like that, but things that are going to make the book flow better and easier to read. One of them is we'd like to eliminate budget codes throughout the budget book. Budget codes are for like us accounting, geeks. We want to put in plain language of what codes are and with descriptions. And that will give the reader, no matter which reader it is, an idea of what it is trying to describe and what information it's trying to portray. Second part is, and this was a big one, I think the consolidation of FTEs, we all know that FTEs is a big talking topic at RCSD. How many positions are we budgeting for the next year? So I think consolidating that in one place in the book, all encompassing, so you can see each school, each department, all adds up to the total FTEs. So one person doesn't have to go to up to 17, 20 pages to try to say, how many people, how many positions are they budgeting next year? So I think that's a big plus. I think that's going to help make it a lot easier to read. 1 second, I just have to move. I got two screens going. I got a lot of stuff going on here.
And it won't be in Latin next time.
So Mercedes from communications helped me with this, and she used a really weird word on what this is. It's not Latin. It's like some, I don't know.
Okay.
Like gibberish on purpose. I don't know. I was like, I said that to her. I go, I can't read that. And then she was like, yeah, that's on purpose. So I don't know.
Latin based at least. So
Yes. Okay. If you say so, I believe you.
But it also doesn't give people, the media in particular, opportunity to run with what they think may be in the budget. So I understand why this is necessary.
Yeah. She was like, I'm going to put that in there. You don't worry about it. Okay.
Can I just ask a question, Terry, before you move forward?
Sure.
So first and foremost, I want to apologize to you all. I, for some reason, thought it was at 5:30 and I was feeding my family dinner and serving everybody. And then I got a text from Kalia. So you just mentioned the FTE. This is just filler. So first and foremost, I asked for a visual so that as we're having this conversation, we have some visual guides to help us understand what the CFO and her team are proposing to us so that we're not just making decisions based on what we think it will look like, based on what they're saying. But you just mentioned the FTE. So I went and grabbed the budget book to do a comparison. So right now, for example, in the 21-22 budget, if I was to look at section 4, page 13, and I look at the number of FTEs that are in a school, you're saying move that, I guess, chart into one section that will list all FTEs for the entire district. But would that then be labeled by school, that this school still has this number of FTEs at the school, if it's going to be removed from the actual profile of the budget for the school profile?
Yes.
Okay, so I would be able
so
to open the book, go to where all our FTEs. So one, I want to apologize to the community maybe watching. We're talking about acronyms, and this is a mock document, again, just for visual purposes. I did have people reach out to me about the numbers in this document. And I was like, ignore these numbers. This is all make-believe for us to have a
Yep.
visual guide. So I would be able to open and look at where all our full-time employees, which is what we mean when we are referring to FTEs, our full-time employees. There would be one section that had all full-time employees. And then in that section, it would be identified by each full-time employee, what school they were at.
Yeah, so if anybody has the document and is following along, like page 19 is an example of exactly what Vice President LeBron is describing. We only listed 3 schools. We aren't going to list out every single building like we just said. It's just a mock-up. But if you can see my screen that I'm sharing, this is what it would look like. It would be school number 2, the number of FTEs that we budgeted last year, the number of FTEs that are being budgeted this year, and the net change up or down. So then you could see on one page every school, and then the next page would be all the departments. So you could see how that, you could see that. So then the very next page, page 20, would be all the departments listed same way. You can see it all in one section, and then a total.
I'm sorry, Terry, I don't see this on my page 19 of my document.
Oh,
So,
of the mock document?
yeah, I see special aid fund appropriation summary.
Okay, it's like number 19 in the document. If you're
Oh, okay,
entire-
I see what you're saying. It's number
the entire
19
PDF,
in the-
it's
yeah,
31 in the PDF. I'm sorry.
it's okay.
Yeah,
I was
there's
like, I don't see it in.
yeah. 31 among 39. If you're looking in the Adobe pages.
Okay, so we would still be able to see all the full-time employees by school. It just would be in one page centralized versus in each of the school profiles.
Exactly.
Okay,
If somebody
Got
wanted
it.
to say, I want to see the whole district at once, you'd have to go to 48 pages.
and let me just say this so that folks who are listening, I actually appreciate this, because when we were talking about cuts to like Edison, for example, in the high schools, I did have to go in and create an Excel spreadsheet and literally list how each of the full-time employees were listed by high schools and do a comparison to the enrollment, just so that I could see where we were at. And so while some of the cuts that were being proposed to Edison, if you do it in that way and you see some of the other high schools in comparison to staffing, there was an inequity there with the number of full-time employees. But the only way that I could visually see that was by me plugging in page by page all of the high school numbers, enrollment, and full-time employees. So I personally would appreciate that. The only thing I would, and I don't know if there's going to be a one-pager with enrollment for all of these schools, that would be great too, to do a one-page with the enrollment of students for each of the schools.
It's not in there now, but
We do have the enrollment. It's on the school profiles. If you look down, it should
yeah,
tell you the number of
I meant
students.
exactly what you were saying. It's not consolidated, but
Yeah.
it's that's something we can look at definitely.
Because
just
if
so
you
can
look at
see
the
it.
student profiles and budgets, it has the position information of full-time employees first. And then right under that is the total number of student enrollment. So we could kind of figure out a way to have the full-time enrollment numbers and the student enrollment for the schools. I would love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Then we get a visual, right? And now we have this visual to see where there may be some inequities in our schools with their enrollment and their staffing.
and budget.
And their budget too.
I'll go right into that, and so as long as we're talking about it, it's a good segue. The very next section, I know we skipped around a little bit. We went down some pages, but with the same kind of idea with the budget in the schools, except the budget's also we are going to keep the page for every school. Every school's still going to have their own profile page with the budget, but we want to make a page like this on my screen. I'm going to make it as big as I can, but also so you can see it. where it pulls the budget, the total budget for each school to one page where you can see the entire instructional budget in one place with all of the schools. And then right here next to the school, we'll put in the page number of their profile page. So if someone's looking here and wanted to go see more detail on school 5, they can then go to the page that it's on, and they can then see these same numbers.
You want us to hold questions or ask them now?
Sure. No, it's fine.
Is it possible with an electronic budget book to like hot link it direct or otherwise allow someone to click on school and then have it jump directly to the page they clicked on?
I don't know. I can ask. Sorry, I'm just taking some notes. Okay. All right. So continuing on from what the points that I wanted to make about making the book flow easier. And another one is, and this is another state monitor recommendation, is that we are going to convert the book to the uniform system of accounts. And what that means is we were actually, there's specific functions and object codes that the state comptroller has made for all municipalities to follow, and has a specific set of them for school districts. I'm just scrolling back up to the top. Sorry, don't look too much at the page right now. The pages that you see now are what the state comptroller refers to as functions. This is how school finances are broken out in area appropriations. And this is when we go to the new Oracle system, that is what's going to happen with that conversion. So we as a finance team thought that at this point in time, it'd be good to get our budget book ahead of schedule, and then everybody's used to looking at it, and then it'll flow nice and smooth when we convert. So when you look at any given page with any kind of numbers on them, they'll all have these same functions listed. We might not have all of these at this school. This is just an example, but that is the chart that's set up by the comptroller. I just wanted to bring up those couple of points before we talk about anything else. A couple of points of concern that were brought up about the book, and one was funding sources on each of the school profiles. Vice President LeBron, I think that that was a concern of yours. I did go and look at the other big 5 budget books. We didn't see anybody else that actually presented that information. I didn't know if maybe that's a like you were talking about the grants specifically, and I can understand that's a point where we might want to present the entire grant maybe on the website as a whole, so we can see again all in one area, so you can see the whole grant, what schools are getting funded, in what amounts. That's just a possibility.
I would support that, Terry. And the reason I think even now it's more critical than ever to, I'll give an example of one of the titles, the allocation for students who are ELL, MLL. Currently, in our budget, what we actually have been told by the state is that, and even our ARP and our CRESA dollars, there is no actual allocation on additional supports to those students other than what the state gives us with Title III. So those are things that, President Elliott and myself are going to be scanning and looking for as we move forward. But, it would be nice to be able to pinpoint it directly and show where we're using some of our dollars And even if we don't have the funding, we're still required by law to provide the services beyond what we're providing. That's why we have a corrective action plan. So we're looking to see where these things are being funded, and also how that is going to grow across the district for services for ELL students in particular. Commissioner Powell?
I just want to note that we're not going to be able to hit our hard stop if we have a lot of segues that take us away from the design questions. So if we could keep moving.
Okay, I don't know where you have a hard stop from, but I guess I missed that part of the conversation, but I will ask and make points about the budget book because this is the work session to do that. But thank you. Note it.
Okay,
Go ahead, Terry.
I'm gonna keep going because I don't want to run out of time. I also want to make it clear that and a little clarification that not everything with a dollar sign has to go in the budget book. And I did keep that in mind. My team did as we were designing this, because we want to present the budget. And when you start putting things in there that are kind of like just a small little piece of the budget, and then you start expanding on those pieces, it's hard to get back to the budget as a whole. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to stay focused on the budget and the numbers coming down to the total budget and what pieces make that budget whole. And then, of course, we can provide extra information or additional information that's wanted beyond that. And lastly, Commissioner Powell, I checked with the city. They gave me some documents about our relationship between us and the city. And I found out that Chris Wagner is retiring. So the acting director sent me some documentation, and I just want to check with them and make sure that I get them the same 4 pages that they've only asked me for 4 pages last year. So I'll just make sure that I get them the format they want. And if they need it included in our book, we can certainly do that. That's what I wanted to go over for my piece. I'm assuming people will have questions. I'm gonna stop sharing because I think
Rebecca might have some. Rebecca, do you have a question?
I did, and I did submit some to Terry and Carlene, and they were great about answering them. I was wondering about as far as keeping the economically disadvantaged piece on the school profiles. Is there a reason for it? And is it, if there isn't a reason for it, is it something that people are willing to remove?
I got to do with the budget.
That's like stepping away from, that's just been in there, and that's been student data that's been included. I'm kind of focused on the numbers, so that would be a decision other than me.
Were you going to be presenting us alternatives, or is this the recommendation? This is what you'd like us to say yes to?
This is the outline that we have put together. I don't have alternative outlines built right now.
This is the document that we are seeking your approval this evening. Just giving us a nod. We're hoping that we met the objectives that we were given, and in the spirit of that, I believe we have attained those. But again, if you have any other comments or suggestions, we're happy to entertain those as well.
I'm actually fine with it. So, I don't know if you want us to do a roll call or vote at this time. Kali, if you want to jump on and give us some advice on how you want us to move forward on it.
I'm here. There actually doesn't need to be a vote. The budget book is always drafted from the finance department. But if the board wants to give just a general nod to CFO Pierce, just so that they can move forward and build. I also see Commissioner Powell's hand is up. I don't know if she has.
Oh, Commissioner Powell.
Yeah, there's are elements of the budget process that are outlined in policy. One of them, I think, still there is program-based budgeting. We're still going to have a section that essentially retabulates some of the some of the budget in the form of programs? Yes, no?
I don't believe that was in the budget book last year.
If you,
Well, it might have been last year, but it's still in our policy. There's
Okay.
our policy on budget, it still requires that we present information about the total cost of programs. And the object, you'd have to go several years back to find a budget book that included it, but it also is supposed to lay out the program objectives for those budgets. Maybe Kalia can shed light.
Yes, I can shed light. And yes, so last year was the first year that it wasn't included in the budget book. The programmatic matters were scheduled to be sent out separately as an addendum that would come not from the finance department, as it is not a finance related developed document, but it would note information regarding the program's achievement, enrollment, everything that folks are used to seeing. You might recall seeing them on the purple pages. That's how I recognize them. But the document was proposed to be shared as an addendum at the end of the year, where that information will be the most updated. And so it is scheduled actually to be provided in May, in May, June, or July, within that period of time. So I don't know if anyone from the administration will be able to update on that, but this was a healthy discussion last year regarding the fact that it would come as an addendum.
Commissioner Powell, you're muted if you're talking.
I just wanted to ask if I could respond to that. The thing is, I'm not sure. Let me put it this way. The reason that it went into our policy and into the policy book in the first instance is that there was little evidence that the administration was evaluating programs, little evidence of what the metrics were, and almost no feedback at all at budget time about whether a program deserved to continue to be funded or not. So this component was designed to prompt the administration to speak directly to what programs were going to be sustained, either because we didn't know they were working or because they were definitely working, and then to actually, and implicit in that was that there would be presentation about what programs would be discontinued because they didn't work. And here's the problem with many policies is you can't legislate, the perfect outcome. We can design our policy to convey that intent, but I think that last year's budget might be an example of how we tried to recognize the limitations of the timing of the evaluation, that we don't have the data for programs when we're building the budget, because the data often comes in at year end, right?
Correct,
So
yes.
it's off step with when we're making financial decisions. But even there, if we use the previous year's information, which is doable if you've got a program that's been around for years and years, one way or another, the superintendent needs to be justifying the continuance of programs by either saying, they're working, or it hasn't been around long enough for us to know if it's working, or we're going to tweak this. It's not working now, but we're going to tweak it and see if we can make it work with one more year of funding. That kind of conversation is what having program-based budgeting included in the budget book is supposed to drive. That's it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to just uplift to that it is part of the state monitor's plan that we do get that data anyway, regardless of the budget process, whether it's been in there or not. We should have been evaluating that. It's never actually been effectively done through the budget. So it is part of her plan that we are presented with data outcomes, budget processes, and that we have an understanding of how our community-based partners and other organizations that we are funneling money to, how effective they are. Because often the conversation is just it's kind of thrown on just the schools themselves, but we do spend a lot of money with partnerships. So just so that all the board members are aware, it is part of the academic plan with the state monitor.
That was
Carlene, did you
part of
have
the
your hand up?
information we saw last week, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
That was mentioned in some information we received last week, correct? Am I correct in that? When they itemized some of the spending or budgeting?
They were giving us a presentation on the CRESA ARP dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, but Shelley, if you want to speak, it's in Shelley's
Yeah,
academic plan.
I wanted to say that that's part of the academic and finance plan, that you evaluate programs to see the effectiveness of those programs before you bring those programs back, to see if there's evidence of impact and whether they were financially sound and gave you a return on your investment. What you saw last week was an analysis of the spending plan for CRSA and ARP. And so it should be a general practice for all monies that are spent by this district. But last week in particular, you were looking at it through the lens of monies that are funded through those two federal programs. But it should, in the plan, it tells you that it should be a general practice, regardless of the funding source.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Jallo. If there are no other questions, I think Carlene and her team are looking for us to give the nod or a thumbs up on the budget proposal, if you will. So I don't know if you guys want to give a thumb up, or if you want to do, I don't know. We don't need to officially vote, so just maybe a visual thumbs up for her so that she and her team could keep it moving. So you have a thumbs up from me, Carlene. I see Commissioner Malloy, Commissioner Patterson, President Elliott, you a thumbs up on it? Do you want to mention?
Yeah, but you all know I like the old book, so I just want to put that
know,
on the
but we
table.
will still have lots of information available, and I will make sure, and folks can hold me accountable for this, that I don't want to say we're going to make things available and it's not easily available. I do not want our community members to be seeking information and have to go and ask and make a request for it, because it could fall into some black hole that they'll never get information from. So I will be making sure, as the chair of finance, that information goes on our website and the budget landing page that we have, and that the information's there and we know where we can direct folks to go and look for it and pull it down themselves. So it just wouldn't be in this giant budget book. And I'm looking forward to a much smaller condensed budget book.
So Vice President LeBron, did you ask your parent rep if she had any questions?
She did. She asked about the
I knew I was out, so I wanted to make sure.
She did, and I can follow up with her. Well, we'll be in finance previews and she'll be there too. So we'll have another follow-up to this before it's 100% finalized.
Speaking of Rebecca's questions, she had a really good one. She wanted just a part in the glance on the budget at a glance, explaining the uniform system of accounts, because that's not what we're used to looking at. So that's going to be added in there.
All right, thank you, Terry.
Thank you. So
Can
I think you have the nod of the board majority at least.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate
you.
your support. And I also want to thank Terry and his team. They took this to heart. They did a lot of research, and I think they really did a phenomenal job. So again, I believe that that's showing through this evening, and we're looking forward to moving ahead with all of you. So again, here's to the future. Thank you.
Yeah, Carlene, so does this make the process of budget development easier for the budget department?
It really does. There was many, many hours of labor that went into the specific information by school. that it was just so laborious that this really will take a lift off of them. So I appreciate that, because then their time can be spent on other matters. Again, when we're looking to gain efficiencies, this definitely is one area in which to do so. So we appreciate your support so that we can move forward now and deliver a quality product to you.
All right, thank you very much, Carleen. And again, thank you for the budget team for all of their work, and to Commissioner Vice President LeBron for her leadership on that. Thank you so very much. So our next item for the work session is the zone reconfiguration plans, and I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Morris.
Good evening, Commissioner.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for allowing me to bring the work of our task force forward to present you with a recommendation regarding zone reconfiguration for the upcoming school year. So I'm going to go ahead and project my screen. I'm just making sure I have the right thing. Yep. Thank you so much. Here we go. All right, so I believe you can see my screen. Just going to slide. So thank you so much. I wanted to bring forward our recommendation that we wanted to put in front of the board for its consideration regarding zone reconfiguration and impact to the managed choice policy. So just to do a brief overview, in 2021, we began to explore options to address the zones that we have now. And we wanted to take a look at varying ways to see if we could improve efficiency to make sure that our students have access to high, rigorous educational experiences that are the same across the district, regardless of where they're attending school. And so the state monitor asked that we create a zone reconfiguration task force, and that was formed in order to get input from both the task force itself and the community. And it's supposed to consolidate all of that together to have the most common concerns and recommendations brought forth to the district and the board. So that task force was given 4 problems to solve. Looking at the managed choice policy, looking at what types of neighborhood school options, if elected to be selected by the board, what that would look like in terms of addressing issues with transportation and access to programming, looking at a feasibility study to look at how feasible neighborhood community schools would be, and also community model schools as well in elementary, middle level programming, and then also to examine grade level configurations to make sure that there's consistency vertically and horizontally with our schools and academic access. So the process that the task force undertook was to begin to meet. They began to meet in January. There were 19 people on the task force, and they met 12 times as a task force. And then those initial meetings, they looked at historical presentations of how the zone had been created. They looked at district school configurations. They looked at the managed choice policy itself. They did comparisons with other districts and other zone examinations that were done across the country. They also went in front of many stakeholder groups, including PLAC, student leadership, the BEC. They made sure to send out different communications to look at the different types of zone reconfigurations that were out. And also there was a public hearing in April, and the task force work and recommendations were presented to the board twice, once in May and once in October. So as I mentioned, the task force looked at reviewing previous work. It looked at other work that was occurring around the country and other areas where they were examining their zones, and tried to engage feedback that would help focusing on education, transportation, looking at feedback from the community, and financial impact with the zones. So the timeline that we have followed includes from January to now, so about a year, where the task force has worked with each other, has engaged with the community in a few ways, and then we have a feasibility study that is ongoing. We initially anticipated that the feasibility study would be complete by December. It is still actually ongoing. And so that relates to some of our recommendations that we are putting forth in front of the board today. So in the plan, we are supposed to give a decision from the board establishing whether they are going to leave the policy the same, modify it, or eliminate it. And also, depending on what recommendation is adopted, looking to have that incorporated into the RCSD budget. So there is a delay in the feasibility report, and that relates to an element of the recommendation that we're putting forth in front of the board today from the task force. So our update is that in October, we initially, when we came to the board in May, we had 3 recommendations. One was to leave the 3 zones as is, with adherence more strictly to the policy, and having an element of more adherence to it. The second policy recommendation that we put forth in front of the board in May was to go to 2 zones from 3. And then the third one was to examine moving to neighborhood schools for all students, elementary, middle. So in October, the task force put forth a recommendation that would change from 3 zones to 2. So that's that second recommendation that was put forth in front of the board in May. And there were 8 associated recommendations. Some of those recommendations related to transportation, and it made recommendations for transportation in and out of the district. And it also made reference to transportations that would occur with students that would be restricted to making sure that students got transportation to babysitters that were located in the zone of residence. And so the task force is recommending a proposal that would allow the 3 zones to remain as is for the 22-23 school year. And therefore it is withdrawing that specific recommendation that related to the babysitting transportation, and it is withdrawing the recommendation about the busing out of district. And we are making this recommendation for this year only. So the recommendation is for the board to consider is keeping the overall zones and revisiting zoning and neighborhood schools for 23-24. This means just adhering to the current zone configurations that we have, and looking at this next year for some reasons that I will list. Another recommendation element is asking that pre-K students get to go to their school within their zones and have the priority to attend kindergarten in the schools that they attended for pre-K. And then the third element of the recommendation is relating to elementary, middle student mobility. So students who are moving outside of their zone after the beginning of the school year, they would be allowed to stay where they're at until fall of the following year. So they would not need to move until the upcoming school year if they made a move. So the task force is asking for this recommendation and presenting it to the board. And we wanted to give the rationale as to why we were presenting this particular recommendation. We're asking for a delay in the final decision about dismantling or modifying the managed choice policy. And there's a few reasons behind this. So one is feedback. The feedback that we've received has emphasized the consideration of neighborhood schools. There have been feedback that we have received about prioritization of pre-K students to stay at their same school, and prioritization of them being able to go to that school for kindergarten allows for minimizing the disruption. And so families and students have given us feedback that says, you know, there's been so much upheaval, especially over the past couple of years. There's a lot of things that are being projected to be done, and this allows us to prioritize family engagement with our schools by allowing our students to have some stability within the school for this time. Additionally, we are looking for the information to provide to the board to help guide the decisions through the feasibility study. And so we have not concluded the feasibility study. Initially, we anticipated it would be done by December. The vendor is still working on it. We have provided the elements of the feasibility study that have been concluded thus far. They've been able to conclude the feasibility study in the area of demographics and enrollment, and in the area of facilities capacity. So they've been able to do analysis of how our facilities are being used, how they are being used to capacity or not, and where that spreads around the district. So for example, they've examined some of the zones and been able to look and see the percentage of utility across the zones in our facilities. And then also we did receive the second element of the feasibility study in the past week and a half. We've also heard from the board and other constituents, you know, that there are other ways to look at this zone reconfiguration. And so we want to make sure that we examine all of that when we're coming to the board and asking the board to make that decision. The framework of the feasibility study is critical, and making sure that we have that information in front of you to help you with that decision making is elemental to making sure that we make sure that a long-term decision is made in the best decision for our students. So, what are the benefits that we see of adopting this recommendation? So, we believe that by adopting this particular recommendation, this gives us time to be responsive to the needs of parents and the community and families, considering specifically what everyone's been through. We've had COVID, we've had so many different changes, we've had proposals. We wanted to encourage an opportunity to leave things as is so that we could make sure that when we make this move, that we're taking that into consideration. It allows us to have the opportunity to stabilize and thoroughly resource transportation options for our families. It allows us to have time to examine the information that has been presented to us. So that's including the feasibility information, additional elements and ideas that have been presented to us. For example, Vice President LeBron has raised an idea of looking at additional zones. And so that gives us the opportunity to look at things like that and see if that's feasible within the information and the framework that we receive from the vendor with the feasibility study. It gives us time to get the final complete feasibility study and consider the information and the recommendations within that. The final feasibility study will take into its final form additional community input. It will do outreach and do additional surveys and connection with the community as well. And that will be presented to the board upon completion. We anticipate that will be around March or April latest, that will be finished for the board. it will give us the opportunity to work further with the task force to push forward the initiatives as described by the state monitor. And then it also gives us time for full examination of our policy. So specifically the managed choice policy and the transportation policy, and having that that examination by the board and the administration, specifically in the policy committee, we think that we'd be able to look at it line by line and make sure that it's meeting the needs of our families and our community. And so what voting yes on this recommendation means, it would allow us to keep our current 3 zones with current transportation paths, but revisiting the zones and neighborhood schools elements for 23-24, because we would be requesting an expedited review of the managed choice policies and the transportation policies in the policy committee by the board with the administration, so that it would be ready for consideration for implementation by the fall 2023. This would allow our pre-K to go to schools within their zones and have the priority to stay there for K. So it allows for continuity for our students. And students who move during the year get to stay in the school that they're at until fall of the following year. And then the RCSD task force will be able to continue the work supporting the plan. Thank you. So I see several hands, so I'm going to minimize this so I can see who has their hands up.
So let me just, first of all, thank Dr. Morris for this presentation. And I know there are a number of questions. And so let me start off with Commissioner LeBron with questions. And I'm going to ask if we can sort of just do about 2 or 3 questions at a time and then go around and see if other folk have questions. So Vice President LeBron, let me start with you.
Thank you, President Elliott. And yeah, I'll limit it to 2 and then
we can go around.
And then I have, yeah, because I have several, so I'll limit
it.
So
thank you.
No, thank you. So first, let me just say that we were talking about closures and mergers, this managed school choice and reconfiguration all happening potentially. I don't even know how we would have done that, by the way, but so I'm glad to hear that there's some slowdown so that we can at least get this, be thorough about this, right? Because we're talking about thousands and thousands of families that would be directly impacted. So I do want to appreciate that we're slowing down a little bit on that. But around the feasibility study, when I looked at the vendor's not a local vendor. So I am going to be leery around someone who lives in Miami telling me about my neighborhood and my community and what's best here. So I just want to uplift that, because that right there, whatever recommendations that they give me, they do not live here. So they're just looking from a map and not understanding what that means when I live in 14605 versus 14619 versus 14610. I personally, I can't take those recommendations from an organization that is from outside and doesn't know what those zip codes mean to the heart of the people here. So I just have to point that out. And then I just want to uplift on the zone piece, and then I'm done, Commissioner Elliott, because I do have some questions. I will save them. Middle school, you mentioned giving priority to middle school for folks. And I did map out all of our schools by zip codes and actual quadrants, not the zones that we currently have, but by quadrants. And right now in the Northwest, there are actually only 5 elementary schools that serve pre-K through 6. And then for 7 through 12, there's only 1 school, that's Leadership. And we all know that that school is up for closure, but that is an all boys school. So if I'm a female student and I leave 6th grade, I have no options in the Northwest for middle school. So I know that that's one of your recommendations, but I need to understand how you would address that for the Northwest for female students currently. Because if Leadership closes and we don't have a 7th, 8th for boys or girls there, because it's potentially another high school, unless Northeast is going to stay 7th, 8th, and it will be both genders. The other only option is to force a student from the Northwest into the other zones. So how would that be addressed?
So that's going to be covered in Dr. Myers-Small's element of the presentation. So in the other presentation that we're going to have when the superintendent presents, that is going to cover that element. And I definitely agree with you with your first point where, slowing it down just made sense, particularly considering all of the proposals that we have put forward with the board. So I agree with you completely with that. And when it comes to the presentation of the recommendations from the feasibility study, I agree. We need to keep that lens on that, whatever recommendations are coming forward are just that, they are recommendations. And if they don't have the element of having the view of our district, then we need to consider that recommendation with that lens. So I just want to at least say that I agree with you. The first one is absolutely something I agree with completely. It would have just been completely a lot of turmoil for our families if we had just done all the things that were on the table for recommendations.
Have another question, Vice President? Or
Oh,
was
I'm
that
going to
two?
yield for now. Yep, those are my
Okay.
two comments and questions, and we'll come back round robin. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Commissioner Powell?
Thank you. I'll follow that pattern. I have a bunch of comments, but I'll restrict mine to 2 for this round. And both of them are focused exclusively on pre-K. In your presentation, you suggest that trying to channel, I might be getting this, might be stating it wrong, but channel pre-K students into pre-K programs within their zone. And so that we can guarantee them seats in kindergarten. I don't know if the rules have changed or if we have lost some institutional knowledge, but according to the state, we cannot limit families' choice of pre-K program based on where they live. Check me on.
I'm not sure if then I was clear about what our recommendation is then. So our recommendation is that we are encouraging our families to do pre-K program selection within their zone. And we are prioritizing them via the lottery process to be able to attend kindergarten in the same school that they attended pre-K. So I apologize if I wasn't clear about that.
Right. Okay, so long as we have the same baseline, that although we can encourage them to select a school within their zone, there's nothing that allows us to put up a barrier at the pre-K level. We can do that at kindergarten. We can say, I'm sorry, kindergarten, you live in this zone, even your sitter's in that zone, you can't have a seat in the school in this zone. We can do that at the kindergarten level. And if you're proposing that we offer kind of a fast track or a guarantee, we still have to look at the address and be clear with parents that you only get the guarantee if you live in the zone. So that leads me to my second point. We have at least 2 schools that do not have pre-K in their schools. And that's an equity problem. In part, it means those schools don't have the same advantage of capturing the student population because they don't have pre-K. You don't have a pipeline for kindergarten. And it's also kind of unfair to families who, might want to attend a particular school if they don't have access to a fast track like every other school. Okay, that they have to go to a community agency. They have to wait until kindergarten. Now, once a child is in a pre-K program in our buildings, in theory, at least, those families get access to information about our placement process before anybody else. Our placement people are especially with the preschool parent program, the schools that still have that, engage with the families that have their kids in preschool and can give them the information they need to enroll their kids properly in kindergarten. And that's why having a pre-K program in a building is such an advantage to the school. They get to retain those students, and to the families, they get first access to the seats. So my recommendation is that we look at including pre-K in those schools that are there, those at least two schools, one's a K6 and one's a K8, and make sure they have at least one section of pre-K in their buildings by fall. And that has budget implications as well as organizational implications. We'd have to make sure that a pre-K section is funded in this, with this upcoming budget. I wonder, because it's part of the organization of instruction, whether we want to specify that in policy 4100, that every elementary school shall have a pre-K section. We don't have any policy guidance right now. We've left it to the superintendent to move towards that goal presumptively, but we still have two schools that don't. So, I'll limit my conversation to that for now. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Powell. And I think some of that, particularly discussions around policy 4100, will be covered when the superintendent comes with her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Commissioner Patterson? You're muted still.
Thank you. I don't want to be repetitive because there's been some good questions already posed by some of the other commissioners and the vice president, but you talked about the task force is recommending a delay in the final decision to dismantle or modify the managed choice policy. I saw a lot of information, study and research that you performed on the managed choice policy, but did you also perform any studies or research into the neighborhood or community schools, or going from 3 quadrants to possibly 4 quadrants? I know Vice President LeBron touched on that, having more quadrants. So
thank you for that question. In our May presentation, we presented a recommendations draft that did discuss neighborhood schools. We also have the feasibility study vendor looking into the feasibility of neighborhood schools as well. That's part of the charge of their work. So they are currently doing that analysis, and it will be shared in the final report.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Thank you, Dr. Morris. Commissioner Simmons?
Thank you. Like Commissioner Patterson, a lot of my questions have been answered, but I did have a question, and I may have missed a previous presentation. Did you share the information, or can you share the information on who the vendor was that looked at things and also their scope of work?
Yeah, so I can share the scope of work. They had an RFP. We can send that through the board log. However, their name is MGT Consulting, and the RFP can be shared.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I have a couple of questions before we start the second round. One is a suggestion, Dr. Morris, when you present and you say that you have a task force, in the back of that presentation, can you list the names and the positions of those people who are part of the task force? Secondly, have you all presented, how functioning are the school-based planning teams? Because I would want those school-based planning teams to also to be as involved in the development of the school reconfiguration, managed choice, and the whole bit. I haven't heard a lot of talk around our school-based planning teams, and I think that we need to make sure that those school-based planning teams are connected to this work. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. In terms of the task force members, we sent that information to board members, I believe it was a day or two ago. And also relating to SBMT, when we put forward, the superintendent put forward her recommendations for changes to the configuration of the schools this fall. The SBMTs were engaged through the community meetings that were held at each one of the schools that would have been potentially impacted. Additionally, the superintendent also met with the executive school-based planning committee. Sorry, that was said twice. She met with them as well to make sure that they were aware of her proposals for changes in the district.
All right, thank you. Commissioner, Vice President LeBron, you have questions?
Yep, thank you. So, can you hear me? Oh, yeah, let
Yes.
me lower my hand too. So yeah, the task force, President Elliott, I did follow up with an email and say, hey, can we get those names? And they did send it out. But I do want to point out, because I opened that email, that some of the folks that are listed are no longer with the district. So I do want to uplift that. And then even some of the people that were listed in the other task force are no longer in Rochester. I know some
Correct.
of them, they've gone jobs in other places. So
Correct.
I need to understand, well, if you're still using the name of the task force, there are people that are not a part of the task force, not a part of this district, no longer a part of this community because they've moved on to other cities, then who's left to drive some of these decisions? I don't want to make a blanket statement, but some of the folks I know have been gone for more than 6 months out of this community. So I just want to uplift that. I won't call out names, but I just want y'all to know that y'all send us some names that if you look at the names, most of the commissioners here will know some of these folks from the community that are no longer here. And I just need to know again who's making decisions. But
let me just say this, Vice President LeBron, that doesn't mean that they didn't do some of the work.
they didn't. I called and
Yeah.
asked them. I just want you to know. I
they
want
did
you
not
to
do
know.
any
One of the
work?
people I spoke to said, I only attended one meeting last year. I haven't heard anything from anybody. I don't want to be the person to call these things out, but I want us to be transparent about who's making decisions, who's driving some of these conversations, right? Because at the end of the day, we will then vote on something and the community will come to us as board members, not task force members, us as board members. So yes, I did my due diligence, President Elliott, and I'm gonna talk to you about some of those folks.
Yeah.
Because I asked some of them to talk to you too.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. The school utilization exhibit that you also sent to us, I just want to uplift that, Commissioner Simmons and I did a few visits today and we asked kind of general same questions to some of the principals. But I noticed that the capacity number that keeps being used is not necessarily the classroom capacity in the buildings. And so that is the number I'm interested as the commissioner. I don't want to know about the fire safety capacity of a building. It could be 456 and a school can only have 308 students, but only have classroom capacity for 340 students. That's what I want to know in terms of classrooms and how many students can fit in the classrooms and classroom capacity. I'm not particularly interested in maximum capacity of the entire building on a fire safety issue. So that's what my request would be, if we can get that number updated for each of the schools versus the fire safety number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So 2 things, I want to make sure that I address the task force question, and then to make sure that I emphasize the last request that you had in terms of the data. That will be covered in Dr. Myers-Small's presentation, and so I will make sure to pass along that feedback. The other piece is when we established the task force, the people listed that we sent to the board were the people that were on the initial group of the task force. Additionally, we also had something called a community engagement group that was to draw upon community partners to make sure that we had community input as well. The feasibility study work was supposed to begin this summer, and it would have engaged all of those groups further, but it did not begin until the fall. And so they have not yet begun their community engagement with the task force and that community engagement piece. What we are going to do when we get to that point, which is hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we are going to examine the task force and see who's here and who isn't. We've had, as you've seen, some people that have been promoted, they've left, et cetera. And then we'll make sure that we reconstitute the task force when we reconvene our work.
Okay, thank you. I would want to talk with President Elliott to see if we ourselves could also be a part of one of the task force. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions, Vice President?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
All right,
President.
thank you. Commissioner Powell?
Okay, I have three more things, but I don't want to monopolize. So after the first two, if someone else wants to ask a question, I'll hold my last question, okay? So the first thing I want to uplift sort of dovetails with what Commissioner LeBron said about capacity. The critical information on capacity that we need to be taking into consideration is the number of strands that the building revolves around, and the optimum capacity of each classroom. So if a school has, let's just say 20 classrooms, but is only occupying 18 because they have a 3-strand program, okay? I don't care to know the lost capacity of those 2 classrooms. What I want to know is whether an elementary school has the optimum number of students per classroom so that our teaching resources are maximized, right? So if in that scenario, if I've got 18 classrooms and they're all, 20, 21, 22 students each, that's better than having 19 classrooms, of which 2 of them only have 10 students each, right? That's not an efficient use of our teaching workforce. So stranding is important, whether families stay within the building from K all the way through to 6, or whether they leave, obviously impacts the stranding. Special ed impacts the stranding, but I'm trying to illustrate why Commissioner LeBron's point is so important to the conversation, right? It's how efficiently we use our FTEs that make a difference, not so much whether there's an empty room in a building. The other point I want to make, though, is your plan suggests moving kids who live outside the zone into their proper zone at the end of the school year. And is that what that's what one of your bullet points is, right, Dr. Morris?
We're saying by the fall of the following year following the move.
Right, the following year, right. That is the original intent of the policy. And I think only Commissioner Elliott has been around long enough to affirm what I just said, because in more recent years, there's been an entirely different interpretation floating around. So my question is simply this: would it be helpful to have the policy language clarified so that there's no confusion about what the intention is of placing students within their zone? Would it be helpful to actually put policy language together in the managed chores policy that articulates what you just said, Dr. Morris, about being entitled to stay in the school through to the end of that school year in the event of moving outside of the zone?
I think that would be very helpful. I think that would be great work for us to do if we're able to do an expedited review of the policy as requested. And I think we could have that opportunity to clarify and discuss elements then.
If I could just interject here with what Commissioner Powell was saying, not only the policy, because once we put the policy in place, then it's up to the district to operationalize it. And so what I would also be interested in, once we have an effective policy, and I'm not sure that the policy is not effective the way it is, Commissioner Powell, what I would say is that it comes into how we implement that becomes the problem. And so what the district has to tell us, we've got a policy, right? And then we find that there are times when the policy is not implemented. Our question has to be to you, we've got this policy, why isn't it implemented? Then you need to come back and tell us, these are the reasons why we don't seem to be able to adhere to the policy, but this is what we're going to do to make it right. And so, you know, we've got these policies, but you know, those are the kinds of questions that I'm going to be starting to ask, because I think overall, I think that we have some effective policies. Now, when it gets to the district, that's when, and I hate to use this term, but let me just go and use it anyway, and people can correct me, but they seem to get ignored. And that's what we want to, that's what this board is going to make sure that it challenges the district in, that we're not ignoring the policies that this board sets. So I don't know, Commissioner Powell, if you agree with those statements that I've just said, but I think that we've got some great policies. They just don't get as implemented as effectively. So I think I saw Commissioner LeBron's hand first. I'm not sure, Commissioner Simmons, if you were first.
May I say something?
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Thank you, President Elliott. So I just want to mention that consideration of feasibility of the recommendation of the policy or not is something that we were considering. So for example, with this particular recommendation from the task force, there were actually 4 elements to the recommendation. One was not possible based on current restraints in staffing at buildings and resources. So even though there were 4 in the original task force recommendation, we could only even put forth to the board 3 of them, because the 4th one wouldn't have been doable, for a lack of better term. We wouldn't have been able to do it. So I agree, if we have a policy, if we can't do it, we need to be able to have that conversation with the board to give that feedback. But even in this scenario, that was one of the things we were considering. Is this something we can put in front of the board? Because if they say yes, could we actually do this? And the answer was no for that particular element.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. I appreciate that response. Commissioner Simmons.
I'm not going to be redundant. I just wanted to champion what you were saying. I got really excited when I heard it. I just wanted to re-emphasize policy is only as good as the practice. So I was excited to hear that energy.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice President LeBron?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I'm personally, I'm not interested in adding language to the managed choice. I am interested in changing the policy. It isn't effective. I don't need an outside study, or I, as a parent or 18 plus years, I always will bring up the fact that I have been in this district and will continue to be in this district as my grandson is starting this year, that I don't need I don't want to add language to it. I want us to change it. I, however, do not want us to change it in a way that sounds like it's not going to mesh and be the right fit for this community, with like removing after school and babysitting out of the zone, transportation, when we have schools that end at 2 o'clock and at 3 o'clock and families don't get out of work till after 5. So those are the types of things I'm not interested in doing either. So I don't want us to rush through this, but I also don't want us to move slow like molasses. And I'm not interested in patching the policy. I'm okay with the recommendations, but I will need the superintendent to address, again, for the Northwest, what happens if I'm a female, 7/8, where do I go? Because we can't say we want kids to be funneled into, middle school in their zone, and then they only have one option or none. That's going to be unacceptable, and we shouldn't accept that either. So I am interested to see where the conversation goes. I am interested in neighborhood community schools. I will uplift that at this time there is a bill for the community listening from both the Senate and the state legislators. When President Elliott and myself met with them, have agreed to support as well and write a letter.
Hello?
Commissioner LeBron, you're muted.
You're saying really
She's not
important
muted.
things if we can't hear you.
She's not
Can you
muted.
hear me?
Okay,
We
there
hear
you
you
are.
now.
Okay.
My internet is unstable, so I apologize. So I was saying there's a bill right now at the Senate, and the state legislators have agreed to write a letter of support for that, for half a mile for reimbursement for the district. So half a mile in transportation. We were to do half a mile in transportation, we could do community bus stops, we could do neighborhood community schools, we could look at 4 quadrants. We would still have to look at the Northwest, which former Commissioner Mary Adams shared with me that years ago, there was a parent that came in and gave an entire presentation on the school deficits in the Northwest. And so I'm trying to track that presentation down in that parent. But I just want to uplift again that it is a really large quadrant, and to only have 5 elementary schools there in terms of options, you know, that is a disadvantage for the Northwest community and our students that live over there. So I know that exists. I just want to put that out there, but they serve a special population. And they were another option for families, right? Until we cut the K through 6. So again, we've kind of limited within our own families of the refugee background, the options by doing that. So there are consequences to these decisions. And I just want us to be mindful that whatever action we take, that there will be consequences, good or bad. So again, I'm not interested in adding temporary language to policy. I'm interested in actually changing the policy altogether. But I do not want to rush it. And I also do not want us to move like snails. I've been on here 4 years. 4 years we've been having this conversation. So I do want us to move forward by the next school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President LeBron. Very well said. Commissioner Powell?
Yeah, last point, and it could be contentious in light of what Commissioner LeBron just said, because I'm also frustrated. I have been pitching year after year after year that we open up the managed choice policy for very select purposes. And the one that I've been saving for last is changing the homeschool preference from a half mile to 3/4 of a mile. And I'll give you a concrete example why that would be important. If you look at school 46, okay, it backs up against 490 or 590, so it has nobody for half of its radius. There are no houses at all. But then the building is set so far back on the lot that a half a mile walk preference, 1/4 of that mile just gets you to the sidewalk in front of the building. It doesn't even get you to the building because it's got this huge front lawn, right? And so a lot of the folks that live in the school 46 neighborhood have been complaining for years that they can't get access to their own school because they're just outside the half mile radius. There is no reason whatsoever why we can't, we haven't butted up against exceeding the capacity for the walk zone preference since the first year that the policy was implemented. So there's no reason that we can't expand the walk zone preference calculus to be 3/4 of a mile instead of a half mile. Because the family can only choose one school as their neighborhood school, right? As their walk zone preference. If they live within 3/4 of a mile of 2 different schools, the one that they choose as their first choice school, that's the one that they get the preference attached to. So you know, from a mechanics standpoint, there is no harm in expanding the walk zone the neighborhood preference radius to 3/4 of a mile. And I would like to see first for the administration to endorse that, because I don't think that our board is likely to take up anything that the administration isn't willing to endorse. And number 2, that we do take it up as a standalone. We can pitch the managed choice policy in a year or 2 years from now after careful study. But if we're postponing the decision about zones, if we're kicking that can down the road for another year, then we can make these 2 changes that we just talked about a reality this year. We can increase the walk zone preference and therefore show families that we are serious about supporting neighborhood schools. And we can clarify the language around what it is to, what happens when families move out of zone. And even if that's the only thing we do with the policy this year, those are important changes. And that doesn't mean we can't scrap the policy a year from now. That's my pick.
Yeah, so Commissioner Powell, let me see if I'm saying something wrong, please correct me. Now, in terms of the 0.5 eligibility, I think this board is going to support that. We've got state delegation that's moving this forward. It is getting traction, and I'm going to be writing a letter of support. The mayor is going to be writing a letter of support. So that seems to be moving forward on both sides. Having said that, with the neighborhood schools, it would seem to me if that's the direction in which we're moving, then the community over at 46 school, there shouldn't be an issue. Now, having said that, let me also say this. Part of what and this is one of the issues when I first came on the board. Part of that issue is that they didn't want students of color over at 46 school. Let's just put that on the table. They did not want that. So now that we're moving back to neighborhood schools, because what they did do is that they took their kids out of that school and put them in private schools, right? So now with us going back to the neighborhood schools, I don't have a problem in the families wanting to be in their neighborhood schools. I really don't. But let's just put on the table what the real deal is. I don't want anybody leaving here not understanding what the real deal is. Now, having said that, every school in our community should be a good school, so that people do not want to necessarily choose School 46 because it's considered a good school at the expense of other schools not being considered good schools. So I'll just leave that right there. I'm hoping that, if I said something, if I misspoke, correct me on that, Commissioner Powell.
Well, I can clarify. You're not far off the mark.
All right.
From the very beginning, the School 46 neighborhood, they're the ones that initiated the CCCL, something community for city living, concerned citizens for city living. And their objective was to keep School 46 as their personal enclave. But then some years after that, and this is probably what you're remembering, School 46 made a pitch to change from a pre-K 6 to a pre-K 8. And that, I think, and they articulated something along the lines of, we want to keep our babies, in the school. But other members of the community, understanding that what that does is keep kids who've already been in that school, allows them to continue going through 7th and 8th grade. A lot of the families and people in the community were coming to our meetings saying, we don't want those kids walking through our neighborhood, which was absolutely absurd because those are the same kids that we had in the 6th grade, continuing to walk through the neighborhoods at the 7th grade. What they were really saying is that they're afraid of kids when they get to be big enough to be 7th and 8th graders. They look too much like adults, and now they're afraid of those kids. And there is a race component to it for sure.
Yep.
But I only use that example, Cynthia, because that's the only school I know of that has so much green space in front of it that it is like practically isolated from the rest of its neighborhood, and where the walking distance just doesn't even make sense. I could just as easily have used an example of a family that lives right smack within walking distance of school number 2, school number 3, and school number 4. Because those schools are so close together that a family that lives inside that triangle could choose any one of those 3 schools as their walk zone preference school, okay? But the point I'm trying to make is that we need to show folks in concrete terms that we are encouraging folks to go to the school that's within walking distance, or their neighborhood school, so to speak. And it does dovetail nicely with the legislation you're talking about, because even if a family chooses a school that's just under 3/4 of a mile away, if the legislation passes, the families that are in the outer ring of that walk zone preference would be eligible for a bus, you know? So we could have a bus run a circle around, you know, the outer perimeter of the school, and, you know, and it would be, we could call them neighborhood buses, right? Because they're picking up kids from within the neighborhood. So that it's not at odds with the transportation legislation that's being pushed through either.
All
So
right.
I hope it clarifies. And I hope that we can, I mean, even if we could just do a straw poll on that question so that the administration can know in advance that they've got enough support to, you know, to get behind the proposal, that would be very helpful.
I think we need to talk about that a little bit further, Commissioner. So before we ask for a straw poll tonight. So Commissioner Malloy?
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Morris, I'm wondering if there's any way, as we continue to have these conversations, if some sort of map could be provided to commissioners that maybe can show us currently for each of our schools, how many students are being drawn from the immediate surrounding neighborhoods. I know just being able to visualize that would be very helpful for me. And as we strategize or look to see if there's a way we can map, I don't know if there's someone in the district who can do this, but I need to see all of this on a map and where we're drawing students from, which zones they're coming from, if they're going cross zones. So a map of some type would be helpful as we continue the conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you for that question. I just want to mention that that's part of the feasibility work. There's some element of that you can see immediately in the demographic and enrollment report that we sent out, but also they are positioning some of this in a map form so that you can see where the projected and the actual enrollment of students are by zone and how that's affecting facility capacity.
I think parents need to see that too. Our community members need to be able to visualize it that way. And if it's available on our website so that people can access the information that way as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Vice President LeBron?
Yeah, but thank you, President Elliott. I just want to agree with you. I'm not ready to make a decision tonight, like how we move forward with the amendment. And also, the bill is gaining traction, but that doesn't mean that it's going to pass. We still all need to do our parts in advocating for it and asking the community to advocate for it as well. But even if we were to just make that change, you know, we still have some inequities across our schools. And I don't want to say that we just have to have better schools, because that doesn't actually equate to a plan of action to make a school better. And that's why my push is not just neighborhood schools, but community schools, and assessing what each of those schools need, not just with community partners, but even how we budget for those schools. You know, as we're doing these school visits, we are seeing some of the inequities, why there's larger schools, you know, and they don't have the same level of support and staffing as a school that has, you know, less students. And we need to understand why those things are that way. But I have said this before, and I'll say it again. We as the board can control and direct the budget. And if that's one thing that we have in our preview to do, is that we can direct the superintendent and the administration to equitably fund our schools. They can propose a budget, when we can push back and say, this is not equitable for all schools, and what is the formula that you're using to staff these schools? And so that is something we should be looking at as we move forward. But the only way to do that is if we actually know truly what's needed at the schools. And so, you know, I'll have more conversations about that as we go through budget season, but I just want to put that out there, that the only way that we're going to be able to support our schools is by us using the resources that we have and funding our schools equitably, and then figuring out what are the community partners for that neighborhood, for that school in that area, and aligning with them. And I've said this multiple times, I'll say it again, the district has to learn how to be better partners to our community-based organizations. We're not good partners. We don't even call people back, and we should be ashamed of that. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Any other questions around the school reconfiguration, the managed choice policy?
May I just add one thing?
Sure, Dr. Morris.
Commissioner Malloy, I just want to let you know that School Efficiencies just texted me to say we do have elementary maps that would be able to provide that visual for you, and also they can do high school as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay, having exhausted our questions, can I get a motion? Do we need a motion to close this?
Yes, you do.
I'd like to entertain a motion that we, second? Can I get a second to close the meeting?
Seconded.
All right, thank you.
I got a motion from Commissioner Malloy.
Oh, well, then it was Vice
I
President.
motion.
Okay, there we go.
And then
I
Commissioner
messed that
Malloy
up.
second.
Thank you.
Yeah. You guys act like you want to stay. So thank you all.
We are
all in
staying.
favor.
We need to take a vote.
Aye.
Everybody, aye? All right, thank you. So we will close this session. Before we close, let me just announce that we have our ESA Committee of the Whole. That'll be chaired by Commissioner Camille Simmons. We also are going to have a special meeting after the ESA meeting to discuss the financial and academic reports that are to be submitted to the state monitor. So that will be on February 8th. So I want to thank you all for joining us and have a good evening. Good evening again. Let me apologize on behalf of the board. We closed our session too fast. We did not take a vote on the recommendation that Dr. Morris presented to us. And so we have to be on screen for the public to know what our vote is going to be in terms of the recommendation. And so let me open it up and ask my colleagues their vote for the recommendation. And what you see on the screen is what the board is going to be saying yes to. Keeping 3 zones with current transportation paths, but revisiting the zone neighborhood schools for 23-24, pre-K go to school within their zones and have priority to stay for K. That means kindergarten. Students who move during the school year get to stay until the following school year. The Rochester City School District Zone Task Force stays intact to continue the work supporting the plan. Requesting an expedited review of the managed choice 5153 and transportation 8400 in the policy committee by the board with the administration so that it will be ready for consideration for implementation by fall 2023. So that is what the board is going to either affirm or they're going to disapprove. So can I get a motion or vote for what the deputy superintendent is recommending? All in favor?
Discussion.
Motion.
Is there
motion?
motion, discussion?
I'll
then-
motion.
Yeah.
Excuse me, thank you.
Second.
Okay, so motion by Vice President LeBron.
I do have
Seconded
one
by-
quick question as well before you take the vote.
Sure.
Only to understand whether or not this is a straw poll or a real motion for a decision to be made. So I do want to document it correctly for the minutes.
May I-
Is it just a nod, just like with the budget book, or is it,
Adrian, can you give us some advice on this one, actually?
If you're giving a directive, and really whether you call it a straw poll or I don't think whatever you want to call it, if you're going to give a directive to the administration, then it is a board vote on action. So if you don't intend to give the administration your explicit approval to take the action being requested, then don't vote at all. Don't even take a straw poll, because I think we're gonna, whatever you call it, you're giving a express permission on the record for action to be taken. So if you're giving permission, do the motion, do the discussion, and then take the vote.
All right, so we have the motion.
Madam President.
Mhm.
So if we could just look, I agree with everything that our parliamentarian just said, but let's look at these bullets. Keeping the zones, that's already there, that's the default. Pre-K going to the school was within their zones, except for what I just said about there being some schools that don't have pre-K, that's the default. Students moving within, who move within the school year only get to stay to the end of that year. That's supposed to be the default according to the policy. Keeping the task force in place, that's a superintendent's prerogative. And the last bullet about policies, that's within our control. So what I'm trying to say here is, in the absence of an alternative where the administration is proposing something they don't already have the authority to do, this would be the default posture. We can give it either a straw poll or a hard resolution vote, but it's just to say basically continue taking care of business as usual. That's what we would be saying with this vote. Unless we were presented with a set of recommendations that actually upends policy or has budget implications, a vote in this instance is really only a vote of confidence or no confidence.
Yeah, that's why I was having some difficulty even espousing whether we should do a vote. Commissioner Malloy?
Yeah, and just to add, if we continue to kick the can down the road and delay making these types of decisions, we have charter schools that are slated to open a year from now or slated to open the year after that. And I feel like we're going to be providing them with more students in a way when we're not taking a decisive action in any way.
Yeah, but these are already in place, Commissioner Malloy.
Yeah, like if we continue the status quo, right, we're just kind of kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, understood. Commissioner LeBron?
I just want to.
Vice President LeBron?
No, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to add though to that point that there are a mirage of reasons why families leave the district. It's not just the managed choice policy. So I don't want to put it all on this. We change this. That is not going to miraculously draw back families. In fact, there are many other things the district actually has to fix to draw back families. So I think that I'm gonna support what our legal counsel is saying. And thank you for that, because previous leadership has told us, well, the previous president used to be like, straw poll. I will not be doing that no more. If we're making a decision, I will ask for a motion in a second and go through a formal voting process. But this is what the administration is asking us to vote on. They put it all here as one. If Commissioner Powell, you're saying the only one that really our vote would technically count is towards the last bullet point, I'm okay with that too.
Not even that, Commissioner LeBron, because that's within our purview to do with or without this resolution.
So there's a motion and a second on the floor. Does that have to be withdrawn? If you're
No,
saying we don't have to vote on it?
No, we can have the vote, but it's simply affirming, it's really just a vote of confidence for the administration.
Well, I don't want to personally word it like that. I want to word it as a vote for this particular ask in the resolution. Let me just say that.
So General Counsel Neal, how would you advise that we form a motion?
There is I believe there's I mean, the slide says you're voting on the recommendation, and there are specific bullets about what the recommendation means. So you are voting on these recommendations as put forward by the administration.
All right. Although they're, to Commissioner Powell's point, that we already have them, they're already a part of what the administration is responsible to do anyway. So
yeah, that is correct, but that's what
Okay.
they've asked you to vote
right.
on.
Okay, so we've got the motion. Commissioner
President
LeBron?
Elliott, I do have to uplift though, like I had a meeting today with our commissioner from the county, Thalia Wright. And because of the eviction lift, eviction courts have been flooded, and some landlords, they don't care about money. They just want to evict folks out. And we were talking about the impact that that's going to have on our students. And so I just want to be mindful of that as we students who move during the school year get to stay until the fall. There are going to be some families who are going to be displaced from that and then may have to be somewhere temporarily or housed in a shelter and then move back. And I know that McKinney-Vento accommodates with the transportation piece, but I just want us to be mindful that we will be getting flooded in Monroe County with evictions. And so I just want us to be mindful of that, but that's all.
Commissioner Powell?
To that point, McKinney-Vento, the federal law governing homelessness would cover that. They would be excluded or handled on a case-by-case basis.
All right, so can we move forward with any further discussion around the resolution? We've got Commissioner Vice President LeBron who made the motion. Commissioner Malloy, did you second?
Commissioner Simmons.
Commissioner Simmons second. Any more discussion on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I think we have to all be visible. Can we take down the PowerPoint first?
That is
I'm
correct.
sorry.
Thank you.
All right, so
President
all those,
Elliott, I had my hand raised.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Commissioner Malloy?
Yeah, I just want clarification around for next year, transportation. We are guaranteeing transportation as is to all families for next year. Is that,
Correct.
can someone speak to that or?
We are allowing all transportation paths to be current and continuing. We are not recommending any changes to transportation through this at all.
Okay, and that's regardless of what we kind of decide here right now.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay,
Nay? Did you say nay, Commissioner Malloy?
I did.
Okay, so 5-1, it carries. All right, so motion to, if we're done with all of our business at this point, a motion to close. Motion?
Can I say one last thing? So sorry.
Go ahead.
Just regarding the managed choice, I think the public needs to know that, I mean, this has been near exhaustive conversation. This isn't something new that's just being brought up. There was an entire feasibility study done back in 2016. And so this isn't anything new. And so I guess I voted nay because I feel like for a lot of the changes in the district, I just see this as continually kicking the can down the road without any real change taking place for our families.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Malloy. So all those in favor
Of adjourning?
of adjourning?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Hold on one second. You just called for a vote, but there was no motion and second this time around.
Motion.
Seconded.
Thank you. I'm really blowing it tonight, aren't I?
You're fine.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you, everybody. Good night.